and welcome back to the Calm and Connected podcast. I'm your host, Janine Halloran, and on today's episode, I get to have a lovely conversation with Emily Cherkin, the Screentime Consultant. She empowers parents to understand and balance family screen time by inspiring a movement around becoming tech intentional. She's a mother of two, a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old, and a former teacher, and she is intimately familiar with the daunting challenges facing families in today's digitized world. So she wrote a book called The Screentime Solution, a judgment-free guide to becoming a tech-intentional family, which was published in 2024 in January. So I'm so excited to be able to share our conversation with you. We talk a lot about some practical ideas that you can use for your family and being able to recognize that it will change depending on who is in your family, and it will look different than your neighbor. So I hope that you really enjoy our conversation. Emily, thank you so much for being on the Calm and Connected podcast.
It's an honor to be here. I'm excited to talk with you today.
So I haven't gotten a chance to share anything about you with my audience yet. So if you want to tell a little bit about your story and why you decided to write the Screentime Solution, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, so I come from a teaching background. I taught middle school for 12 years. And from the very beginning of my teaching career, no one had smartphones or cell phones because this was in 2003 in the olden days, right? That was not a thing. And of course, there was like one kid whose mom was super anxious and wanted him to have a flip phone, and you'd be totally embarrassed to have it. And what I realized after 12 years in the classroom was 95% of my students had phones. So I went from 0 to almost 100% in just over a decade. And as part of that observation, just really noticed a sea change in how children were interacting with each other, their ability to cope with big emotions that were developmentally normal for middle school age students, and the increased dependence on parents to sort of rescue, save, and protect. And again, good intentions, but really displacing a lot of skills that I saw as absolutely critical to that age group. And then, of course, simultaneously, I was a parent myself. So now my kids are 13 and 16, and it is, I mean, I'm living and breathing this challenge as I am also trying to help other parents in it. So I started my business 5 years ago as the Screentime Consultant, and I was like, well, I don't know what else to call myself, but that seems Googleable, and it has been so. And so I do some coaching, but I also do a lot of parent education through schools, sort of parent speaking kind of things, workshops, professional development, that kind of thing. And I love doing that. And so I wrote the book because there's so many books about the problem, and I wanted to provide a book that was a solution. And it's written to be timeless in the sense that it's not text specific. It is parent and family and kid value specific. And so how can you parent even as technology changes in a way that I call tech intentional?
I appreciate the practicality. And that's, a lot of times I find working in particular fields, like when we're in helping professionals, there's a lot of information out there about what it looks like, what the stats are, what the research says. But then how do we translate that into something that's practical and doable for families? And
Yes.
it sounds like, and for somebody who actually is also living it. So I also have a 13 and a 16-year-old. That's very funny. Um, so to know what it means to actually be in the muck of it, when everybody else has a phone, everybody else has this, everybody else is on this, like the everybody else.
Exactly.
And helping to navigate as they get older too, because it changes. What worked when they were like 10 does not work when they're 16. And so having to navigate that and to have that real world experience, real life experience, like day in, day out, but then to also have all the knowledge and expertise that you've gotten from doing the work that you do as being a consultant with other families. Like that is incredible.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been very valuable. And one often informs the other, right? Knowing what it's like as a parent and hearing what my kids are saying, but then also seeing and hearing from other parents. So yeah, I mean, I think the other thing is that it's not a one size fits all solution, and it's not going to look the same from family to family, and even within a family from kid to kid. And, you've got to take into account developmental changes, but also just temperament and personality. Like, I mean, one of my kids is a moth to a flame when it comes to tech, and the other one can just sort of, turn it off when he's done. But like, that's the way it goes. And that's why these sort of one size fits all approaches don't work. So it does require more work as parents.
But I think that's really what it comes down to as parents. You have a child and you're raising that child, and you have to really respect their temperament, the things that stick to them like glue, the things that call to them, the things that spark them, the things that make it harder for them. So you really do, you have to be, it's not one size fits all. And I really appreciate that, because when it sounds like it's one size fits all, I'm like, but that's not going to work for this situation or that situation or that child or this child. You have to sort of take the information and be very thoughtful about what's going to be helpful for your family, and be okay with it looking different than your neighbors.
Exactly. And I think about it a lot like baby proofing, like when they're 2 to 3 to 4 years old, like getting taller and more agile and mobile, like you have to change how you structure your physical environment, right? Like they can now access higher shelves. So do you move the dangerous objects out of the way? Like that's the same way we have to parent in the teen years too, is like it's going to be different as their independence seeking increases, but also as they need still to have clear boundaries and rules, in place for their own, growth and development. Yeah.
Absolutely. So what advice would you give people if they're looking to find a balance of technology in their homes? Because technology is with us, it is part of our lives.
Yep.
And so how do we find this balance? Because it's going to be there. So ignoring and putting it out completely is not going to work in our homes, but what can we do?
Right. So my definition of tech intentional is kind of broad, wordy. So here's my TLDR version of it. My too long don't read. Later is better, less is more, relationships first. That's it. And it's an easy way to remember it. So like, again, because it's not a one size fits all, it's like, I think anytime we dip into absolutism where it's like, my child will not touch an iPad until they're 15, like, I mean, sure, maybe there's a few people who can successfully navigate a world like that. I don't think that's the majority of parents, but I do believe that the later we introduce it, the better it is because of what we know about brain development and children and how they learn. I think less is more. So if you are going to introduce it, then less is more, right? And, that may mean 30 minutes here and there instead of 3 hours here and there. But for some kids, 3 hours isn't going to hurt them. And that's, again, I say this because there's so much variability and you really have to, it's less about the total amount and more about what are the other things that they are doing. And can they entertain themselves independently of screens? And are they having time with friends in the real world? And are they playing outside and doing tactile, three-dimensional experiences and all of that other good stuff? And then the last one, relationships first is like, I tell parents, like, this is the problem with parental controls, right? Like they displace the relationship part. They're a piece of technology used to solve a problem technology created. And we can't, and they don't exempt us from the parenting. We have got to have these conversations with our kids because it's not a question of if they see porn or violence or something scary, it's when. And so we have got to have those conversations in an age appropriate way from the moment they touch a screen. And it's just like, sometimes stuff on the internet isn't for kids. So please just let me know if you see something you don't understand. I'll never be mad at you. And that is absolutely all about the kind of relationship we have with them. So focusing on that piece of it is an antidote to some of that later mental health stuff that comes up.
Yes, absolutely. I was just talking to Ned Johnson, who wrote What Do You Say, along with Bill Stixrud, whose name I always mispronounce. So I'm glad I got it that right that time. Yes. Their first chapter of that book is all about empathy and connection and the relationship building. It has to be there in order to have these bigger conversations, in order to talk about these tough things, to bring things up in order for you to actually make an impact and have a difference. You need to have the relationship, and it is such a protective factor, protective factor.
Yes, and I think to the work that you do and talking about parents and parental coping too, one of the things that I love this little analogy or data point because I think it helps us realize that how the role that parents play in establishing that sort of secure relationship and empathy. It doesn't mean perfection, by the way, as you know. It's like I always say 80% of the time we're parenting the way we want, and 20% of the time we're going to mess up. And that's a great opportunity for repair and all of that. But, Pew Research recently did a survey of American parents and asked their top parental fears. Number one is bullying. Number two is youth mental health. And number three is kidnapping. And I bring these up because one of the things I write about and talk a lot about is this idea of what is scary in the world versus what is truly dangerous. And too often, we as parents are hijacked by clickbait news headlines and sensational TikTok videos that make us think that the things that are scary about the world are actually dangerous when in fact that's not true. And so I find those top three data points fascinating because statistically, kidnapping is so incredibly rare. In fact, somebody did the math. If you wanted your child to get kidnapped, obviously we don't, but say you did, you'd have to wait outside for 750,000 years to be guaranteed of being kidnapped.
Wow.
I mean, that's not a lifetime, that's multiple lifetimes. And yet, what I hear is parents give their kids smartwatches and smartphones as a way to keep them safe. And if they get kidnapped, I can track them. And yet, giving kids devices makes number one and two worse, makes bullying and youth mental health worse. So, this is where I invite parents to take a very deep breath and reevaluate sort of that scary versus dangerous dichotomy, because we have got to respond to the dangerous, not the scary. And that comes down a lot to our own ability to cope and our own consumption of media as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I just think it's so interesting to be able to actually notice what are the things that we're most concerned about. Like, gosh, that's an interesting top three. It's
Yes,
an
isn't
interesting
it?
top three.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
When you think about it, because, and part of it is like what we consume, right?
Yep.
Like, what are you watching? What are you listening to? What are the stories that are the headlines that grab you? And
Yes.
it's of course going to be the scary ones, even if
Yes,
it's not that frequent, even if it's not
exactly.
that likely, but it
Right.
feels scary. It feels like it could happen at any time.
Right, right. In my presentations, I talk about sharks versus bathtubs because
Mm.
people are afraid of sharks. Sharks seem really, really scary and dangerous, only in the sense that they are, if you are in a bad situation with one, and right, nobody wants that. But statistically, we are far more likely to die in our bathtub than in a shark attack. And yet, nobody is freaking out about bathtub safety, and nobody is watching shows on TV called, bathtub. We don't have bathtub week, right? We have shark week. And so it skews our perception of risk, right? And that's the thing that I think parents have a lot of work to do to be aware of what are some of those true dangerous things about the internet, right? Versus what's scary and the reasons for our giving those devices in the first place.
Yes, absolutely. So I love your TLDR. Is that what it
Yes,
is?
yes.
I always sometimes I mix up my letters, and so I have to be like I have to stop and think, right?
Yes.
So thinking about later is better. Love that. Less is more. Relationship first. So let's talk about less is more. How can you reduce screen time? Do you have any quick tips for families for how to reduce screen time?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I did write the book about families, but a lot of it comes down to parent use of screens first, right? Because
Mm.
about the modeling piece. And so one of my favorite tips to give parents is this idea of living your life out loud. That we narrate what we do as we do it, particularly around screen time. You can do it about anything, but what it does is it brings our attention and our own awareness to how much we're using our devices. So like I'm reaching for my phone, I'm going to check and see what time soccer practice starts, and then I'm going to check Google Maps and see how long it's going to take us to get there, and then I'm going to look at the weather. Like broken record repeating these boring details of life. And yet there are so many benefits to this, right? First of all, we're showing our kids how we're using technology as a multi-tool, not as like a single use device. We're showing our kids that we are aware when we're reaching for it, and like what they see on the back of our phone versus what we see on the screen are two very different things. We can also throw in that emotional experience too. We might say, I'm standing in line at the coffee shop and I'm so bored, and I'm opening Instagram and I'm just scrolling because I'm waiting and I'm bored. And we might say, it doesn't make me feel better. And now I feel like I've compared myself to other people and I'm not doing enough. And so then the kids can see us start to articulate that experience, so that when they get to that point, they might be like, oh, I guess people feel different ways when they use this, right? Like they can apply it to their own experience. So that piece of it for sure it starts with the parents, that modeling. When I always say to families, when your kids start rolling their eyes at you for doing that, you know it's working, because they're like, oh, would you stop telling us what you're doing? But that's the point. And what you want ultimately is the kids to start doing it too. So I've noticed this a little bit with my 16-year-old. End of dinner, he might say, oh, I'm going to go check in on a text thread, and I'll say, thank you for living your life out loud. Like, I make a point of thanking him for doing the thing I've asked him to do, right? Because where attention goes, energy flows, right? So we want more of that behavior. We want to reinforce the message that what you're doing is in alignment with our values. So that is important. Again, we're not doing this 100% of the time, but go for 80%, right? And what you'll find, and I have found this is so true, often co-parents will be like, oh my gosh, my partner doesn't ever do it, and now I totally notice how addicted to their phone they are. And so it's a great way for us to start to bring awareness to it for ourselves.
I think that's wonderful because it also helps kids start to do that internal monologuing for themselves, that
Yes.
external, and then it becomes internal, because then they can say, why am I picking it up?
Yes.
Why am I going to go to Instagram right now? Am I bored? Am I sad? Am I anxious? Am I worried? Am I angry? Like, what is it?
Yes.
And how do I feel
Yes.
when I'm doing it? And how do I feel periodically throughout the time that I'm doing it? Am I starting to feel more irritable? If you feel irritable, it's no longer fun. That's what I actually say to my son when he's playing a game and he's starting to get really hyped up and irritated. I'm like, it's supposed to be fun, right? Are you having fun? And if you're not having fun, you can stop. You don't have to play. You can walk away, go kick a soccer ball, which he does.
That's great. And what I love about that too is it's like we want our kids to identify the feelings they're having so that they know how to cope with them and respond to them, right? Like, I do worry sometimes that the devices distract children from feelings, that it's a way to disappear. I mean, I say children, but let's be honest, adults do this all the time. It's a way for us to avoid uncomfortable things. And I would argue that we actually really need our kids to have uncomfortable and difficult experiences to be resilient later.
Yes, absolutely. They need to have those experiences of challenge in order to get better at challenge, in order to deal with it. In order to do it, you've got to actually have it. Like, we can't smooth the way. We cannot smooth the way for them. And it feel like, as parents, I get the pull to want to smooth it. I totally get it.
And I'm sure you're familiar, like the snowplow parent or the lawnmower parent, right? The one that we go ahead of our children to mow away these obstacles to keep them from experiencing discomfort or pain. And again, as a parent, I also empathize with that, and I understand the desire to have that be there, but we need our children to have these bumps so that when they're out in the real world on their own, they know how to cope with them. And I really do worry that the reliance on technology as a way to protect and soothe actually has the opposite effect. And so that's a hard one, and it requires parents to change how they also interact with their kids and use technology with their kids as well, right? Like, texting your kids at school is not okay. It's problematic. I have been guilty of it myself. But if what we want is for them to be focused on learning, and of course, schools have different policies, right? Some allow phones, some don't. Kids are doing it anyway, is the reality. But you've got to stop texting them at school, because that is our anxiety and meeting our need to communicate. And we can do that in another way, which is the front office of a school. They all still have them. Messages can still get to children. And that the flip side of that is giving the kids their own independence experience at the school day, where they're not relying on us to solve problems for them. But that is hard. Almost every parent I talk to says, oh yeah, I text my kid at school because it's convenient. I get it. I totally understand it. But this is snowplow parenting. We've got to stop mowing away the obstacles. We need to put up a few so that they can learn the skills to navigate life.
Absolutely. So, speaking as a parent, how do you control screen time or limit screen time in your own family?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I can tell you, I have tried and failed many things over the years, because that's part of the process of this, is learning and understanding and doing better. I mean, we went back in the early days, it was a lot of like, if you do X, then you get screen time. Now I try to decouple that. I don't want this to be a reward, because then we just load screen time even more. We make it the thing that's even more powerful. It already is so powerful. We delayed phone access. Like my son started with a flip phone, and then of course his middle school years were in COVID. So that really sort of shook things up in a different way. Although it also had the added benefit of not having the peer pressure because he was at home. So he couldn't see who had one and who didn't. We've also, again, it's about privileges and responsibilities and less about if you do X, then you get Y. And again, my kids are older, so it is different, but we've always had some sense of limits, and the non-negotiables is what I call them. Like sleep is a non-negotiable. Like that's the low-hanging fruit, parents. Like if your kid is not getting enough sleep, that ripple effect causes problems the rest of the entire day. And so if you want to start anywhere, it's prioritizing good sleep for all of us. I'm going to throw us in there for parents as well. So get phones out of the bedroom. And yes, I mean adults too. And so actually, that is one thing we've been very good about, both modeling it and having that as the expectation for our kids. And, do we screw up sometimes and forget? Yeah, but that's life too. And we don't come down hard on it as a punitive thing. It's like a learning opportunity. You forgot to bring your phone up last night. It doesn't happen often, and my 16-year-old knows that that's the expectation. I think in general too, it is better to have fewer clear policies than a long multi-page document, because and this is what I say to families: if your rules don't fit on a post-it note, you have too many rules about screen time, because there's no way you can enforce, follow through, be consistent with. And I would rather you reinforce 2 or 3 really key important things than 20 things that are just only going to work for 2 weeks and then everybody forgets about it. So that's my advice on that one. But it starts with us too, as parents, for sure.
Oh my goodness. And, such good practical strategies, and to be understanding and give ourselves grace and give our kids grace. Like they're going to mess up. We're going to mess up. That is okay. That is expected.
Yes.
We are human.
Yep.
But to try and do something that will work for the family, but is also really still about the connection. It comes back to having the connection. You want to be able to have that relationship with your kids, to have that time where you can connect, to be with each other, to hang out, to talk at dinner, to have those conversations when you can.
Totally. And I have this wonderful parent educator who taught me this like 20 years ago. And I just still think about it. I wrote about it in the book, but like it's the phrase, "I forgot to teach you." And what it does, it is so disarming, because so much around screen time is fraught, right? With conflict and stress and judgment and defensiveness. But if I say to my kid, if he pulls out a phone at a restaurant and I say, "Oh, I forgot to teach you that when we're at a restaurant, we don't look at our phones because it's rude." Or, "I forgot to teach you that when grandma comes to say hi to you and you're looking at your phone, she doesn't feel like you're listening to her. So you need to remember to put it away." It's not "put your phone away, you're being rude." It's me as a parent. "I forgot to teach you this really important thing around it." It is so disarming and de-escalating in a way that allows the teaching to happen without the defensiveness to come into it. It is truly one of my favorite parenting hacks, if you will.
It
I highly
diffuses
recommend it. Yes, exactly. That's exactly it.
It's just like, it's no longer like, now we're not in a battle. Now we're like, now I'm not embarrassed in front of my mom or my mother-in-law because something happened. No, it's just, I forgot, and it's on me, and I'm taking it. And here we are. Like, we're going to work through this together, but it's not really going to escalate a situation, which I'm always looking for. Like, how can I make it better?
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great one. And I think it's, I hear a lot from parents like, "Well, I get so much attitude from my teenagers and my tweens." I just want to remind people that's normal. Like, I think what happens is we forget about what it means to be a teen and a tween. And like, we've all been there, done that. We were sassy and had attitudes and hormone changes and eye rolls and bursts of anger. The screens complicate all that, because we can't tell sometimes what's normal developmental teen stuff and what is influenced or impacted because of the screens. And so we have to sometimes take a deep breath and be like, okay, this is normal. It's normal for my teen to not like me setting a rule, and accept that. It's okay. It's okay. We're not their best friends. I know that's a hard one for some parents, because I think we want to be, And your kid is going to come back to you later and say, I really am grateful that you taught me X, or right. That's it. That's what we want as parents, at least, is for them to come back in 10, 20 years and say, you know, that thing you did that I hated all the time, that really made a difference, right? Because we have to take the long view as a parent. We cannot take the short term, how are they going to think of me at the end of this week? It is, how are they going to think back on this moment in 20 years? That's hard. That's hard.
Something I often tell parents is this is a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly.
We are not, it's like, it's really easy to focus on the short-term stuff. And it is completely developmentally appropriate for them to give attitude. Like it is, they are learning to manage their emotions, and sometimes they don't do it well.
Yeah.
And when I think, I have to think, even as a person who is in the mental health field, I have to like put on my counseling hat and be like, it's just their brain working through things. And it doesn't mean like that my mom hat isn't furious because they're being so rude.
Exactly. I can't do this because it's a podcast, but what I often, the gesture that I like to illustrate for parents is parenting teens and tweens is like talking to your kid and having them give you simultaneously the middle finger and a bid for connection. Come here, I need a hug. Because that's what it feels like sometimes. You're like, how can I be so angry at you and also want to give you a hug in the same moment? And what we have to do is ignore that middle finger. That's hard. That's the developmentally normal part. And we need to pay attention to that bid for connections.
Oh my goodness. It's such good information and so practical and real. I really appreciate that about the things that you're sharing and wanting to communicate to the members of the audience. And so great resources to help parents become more tech intentional, like your book. Where should they go?
Yes. I mean, the irony is I am on social media. I have a team of people who help me do all this. But my website is a great place to start. I write weekly blog posts that I think are pretty helpful and informative about parenting and tech and sort of what's in the current scene with all of that. So if you sign up for my mailing list, you just get one email per week. I don't spam you, I promise. And then I do free monthly webinars. So I sort of pick a different topic. You can just sign up. If you can't make it, you can get the recording. That's just another way to get information. The book is great. It just came out on Audible too. So if people are in the more preferring the audio version, I know what it's like to be a busy parent, then that's now available. And yeah, I do coaching and I do one-on-one coaching, but also a lot of that school support as well. So if you want to bring in a speaker, I love doing that, and I will travel.
Wonderful. So I will link to all of those in the show notes so people can go over and look at that and take a peek at your good information. So I always ask my guests one last question. Yes. What are your coping skills? How do you rest and relax?
Yeah, this is so great. I love that you asked this because modeling, right? Like how we do it. So one of the things I have found in my last few years is I love walking, and I find I have my cousin happens to live in my neighborhood. And so we've been trying to walk 3 mornings a week together, like early. But if we have this partner to do it with, it's that like I will get out of bed and do it. And what I notice is that my ability to cope the rest of the day is fundamentally different on the days that I walk. So even if I can't get it in the morning, walking the dog in the middle of the day, just taking a few minutes definitely helps. And I also, one of my temperament is very driven and motivated and work hard and high energy. And what I have had to do is think about the mantra, less is more. And that is for me, like I have got to go back to that sometimes it's not about doing more, it's about doing less and seeing how I thrive when I do less. So that's for me personally a big one.
I think those are great. I have to tell you, walking is one, and it's like walking in nature, walking with other people, walking is one of the most popular things that guests have said.
That's so interesting.
Isn't that so funny? Because I'm like,
that's post-COVID. Do you think like because we were sort of cooped up and that was like the thing we could do?
You know what? I don't know, because I think I started interviews post-COVID. Like we were already in COVID. Right, but I can't even, so I actually track it all on a spreadsheet because I'm that girl.
Yeah,
so,
that spreadsheet.
But it's walking is one of the ones that so many people have said. It is one of the most popular things that, and everybody has like a different sort of like way of thinking about
Yeah.
it, but it's all the same sort of like, I just need to move my body. I just need to be out and commune with nature. I need the fresh air. I need the sun on my face. I need to connect with a person. But it is like so many people walk. So many people walk.
So there's a whole research study right there waiting to happen. And like, we actually know the research says walking's good for your brain, right? Like, and that's free. Everybody can do it, right? Like, that's a good one. I love it. That's fascinating.
It is. It's very fun. It's interesting listening to different guests and actually like compiling the information from everybody has been fascinating. So I'm in the midst of that, working on the Coping Skills for Adults book, and it's really fun. It's really fun.
Very, very cool. Well, happy to add to that data point.
Yay. Well, thank you so much, Emily, for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. It was really a joy to talk with you, and I'm always happy to answer questions if people want to send me emails. And thank you for having me.
And thank you everybody for listening. If you like this podcast, please feel free to rate it and review wherever you listen. And as always, don't forget about yourself. Take a few minutes, have a little fun, and have an awesome day.